So we're recording now.
Okay.
Just don't touch that.
Don't touch that
Don't
flashing
touch,
button.
don't touch the flashing red button. You're gonna be great.
Okay.
You can do whatever you want. Just don't touch that.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Sure thing.
And I have until 45 minutes. Oh, I got an hour.
Hour and a half.
I got an hour and a half. I got 90 minutes. So give me 75 minutes. If I start at 1, I need to be done.
Yeah, you got 15 minutes in between.
Stop by quarter after 2.
Yeah. I mean, depending on, sometimes the group asks questions. They do if you give them basic, simple examples and say, well, you know, in a community of 300 people, this happens. That rings home. It's 3 minutes. Well, yeah, 2 minutes too. Barry? I don't care. You can put it over there, Shauna, if you want. Yeah, script's here. There. I thought there was supposed to be one. No, there. It says there's supposed to be. Wireless. Thank you. Do I do that or next time? Okay. Glenn is doing it next time. Yeah, lapel microphone. Yeah. Thanks, Sean. Wherever he went. You prefer that?
Wireless
Yeah.
mic? Yeah, because I'm a blonde.
Yeah, I like to do that too.
Yeah.
Especially if I know what I'm talking about, which most times I don't.
But we pretend.
Oh yeah, you can because you know more than anything, more than anybody here anyway. So.
That's what my husband used to tell me. Don't be afraid if you make a mistake. Nobody will know.
That's correct. That's correct. And if they ask you a question, say, it's a really good question. I never thought I'll have to get back to you.
Yeah.
And then you tell them singular, and you were right. I was wrong. No. I'll just wait and see if she can find it. Welcome, SUMA delegates, to our convention. First opportunity for you to see who I am and for me to see who's here from previous years and some new ones. My name is Barry Gunther. I'm the Vice President responsible for villages, resort villages, and northern municipalities. And there's something else in there too, but I always forget. So just say that I'm Jack of all trades, and I'm looking for a Jill of all trades too to help us out. Today we have one, and I'll introduce Joy in just a minute. The session today is being recorded, as has been in the past. However, this year it's not going to cost you anything to get copies of the recordings of the education sessions that you do go to. We will be providing that free of charge on SUMA website starting around the 17th or so of February. So if you do have a question, I would ask that you come to the microphone on the floor. I've just checked it is working. And we will ask our question in a way that can be fully understood by those listening to the recording in the future and by Joy and the rest of our delegates today. Who hasn't been to a SUMA convention before? So we're talking to the converted except for 2 or 3. So you know how things go here. We'll give our presenter an opportunity to provide you with the material that she has available, and then an opportunity at the end, 10 or 15 minutes or so, to ask questions. If we run over time and your question hasn't been addressed, I'm sure Joy will stay with you and ensure that she gets your question answered, or we'll follow up with you later on. This is a session called, and if you say it real fast, I don't know how many of you can speak more clearly than the next person, but it's hard sometimes to say, and this is Managing Roadway Risk. And it's risk getting people, or getting people from here to there. And we all have that issue within our own communities. We have our own assets, and part of the asset that we have is our roadway or roadways. Sometimes it involves a highway, sometimes just a major connector road, but we all have them, and this session hopefully will give us a better insight on how we can do some risk management. This session is sponsored by SUMA Assure, and for those of you who are SUMA Assure members, you need know nothing more than that. But for those of you who aren't terribly familiar with SUMA Assure, I'll describe in point form or in short form just what SUMA Assure is and what it can do for you and your community. As most of you know, SUMA Assure is the liability and property insurer owned by many of us. It's subscribing cities, towns, and villages. One of SUMA Assure's goals is to share information between members on risk management rather than operating in a silo mentality as in the past. With almost 165 cities, towns, villages, resort villages subscribing to the program as of today, this shared information is vital to preventing losses and managing municipal risk. That's why we put on events such as this today. SUMA Assure's philosophy is not just to collect insurance premiums and pay claims, but rather to attempt to prevent the losses before they occur. SUMA Assure does not just pay lip service to this philosophy, but it has put its money where its mouth is and invested in its member communities. In 2013, SUMA Assure undertook one of the largest risk management programs in Saskatchewan's history, engaging risk control engineers to survey 117 of our members' higher value locations. The goal to reduce risk helps our subscribers better manage their facilities to prevent property and liability losses. As the information comes in, the information gleaned from that project will be shared with the entire SUMA Assure community so that lessons learned in one municipality can be applied to all of our member municipalities. Today's education session, while focused on transportation, also has valuable risk management information that can be applied to all areas of municipal risk. Chairing our session today is Joy Jackson. Joy is a professional risk manager based in London, Ontario, specializing in design and delivery of risk management training and solutions. Her experience as a municipal risk manager has taught her how to use risk management techniques to protect clients, workers, volunteers, and assets. She has a thorough knowledge of the intricacies of commercial insurance and the need to buy the right coverage at the best price. This expertise was developed over more than 30 years' experience in risk management, and she keeps topics and materials current to meet the challenges and needs of managers, supervisors, and of course elected officials. Joy is a fellow chartered insurance professional with the Insurance Institute of Canada and a fellow risk manager in the Global Risk Management Institute, which is sponsored by the Risk and Insurance Management Society. She is also a past member of international training in communications and the Canadian Association of Professional Speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, SUMA members, please join me in welcoming Joy Jackson.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. There's a few people standing at the back, and there's lots of seats up here at the front, so don't be embarrassed by coming up and having a seat. It's like school, you know, we all want to sit at the back.
Or church.
Our church.
You still have to give front or back, so the envelopes to give are at the front and at the back, so you're not going to get out of that.
So I want to thank SUMA for inviting me here today. This is a wonderful chance, and I'm sorry I'm not going to have more time to stay in Regina because it looks like a terrific city. Very different from where I come from, but it looks really interesting and lots of things to do here. I want you to feel free to ask questions, although we do have time at the end. What you're going to hear today is probably not going to be earth-shattering and brand new because a lot of risk management is common sense. The problem is we all get busy with our day-to-day lives and the things that we're trying to accomplish, and we often don't have or take the time to back up and stop and take a breath and do the common sense things because we're right in there trying to solve the problem of the moment. So I will be talking about a lot of common sense things, but hopefully you'll hear a lot about some ideas that maybe you haven't tried and some ideas that you will give yourself a chance to try something a little different. First of all, I'd like to ask how many people here are elected officials? Most people are. Are there any people here who are administrators or happen to work in this area of roads management? A few administrators, but nobody in roads management. Okay, so this may be a little bit more new to you than I expected. This is not working. So, when we're talking about risk management, I like to say that my imagination is one of my greatest assets. I like to think about what's the worst thing that can go wrong, and I've had lots of experience of practicing what's the worst thing that can go wrong. And even then, you know, sometimes something comes along and you never could have imagined that happening. The reason, and I try to explain this when I'm writing or helping people do contracts, that the reason we try to imagine the worst that can go wrong is because we want to be sure that what we're doing is, if we prepare for the worst, then we've sort of covered it off and we've got that response ready to go and we're not giving something a knee-jerk reaction. So if we can prepare for it and we can know then how we can prevent it, what can we change that will make the likelihood of that thing going wrong? Because there's two things that we can do in risk management. And one thing we can do is try to prevent something. And the second thing we can do is try to reduce the cost of it, the cost to our municipality when that bad thing does eventually happen. And real risk to me is not knowing what you're doing. So that's why we have to do a bit of a risk inventory and know what are our problems out there and what's the worst things that we have to deal with. You'll see from the picture at the bottom there, I've chosen to talk about winter roads maintenance more so than year-round roads maintenance. And the reason for that is because roads maintenance in the winter is the most difficult thing for a municipality to do. The weather changes constantly, road conditions change with the weather, and sometimes people's driving habits don't change to accommodate the weather and the road surface changes. So we have to be aware of what can we do to try to keep the roads as safe as possible under the conditions that we're dealing with. Has anyone here ridden with a snowplow driver when he's been out there actually doing the work? 2 or 3 people? 4? It's really interesting, isn't it, to see it from the other side of the windshield. It makes a big difference. So this is sort of a classical definition of risk management, a systematic process. And that's true. And it goes on to say making and carrying out decisions. Well, as I said a couple minutes ago, you can't make and carry out decisions unless you know what your risks are. So although this is a classic, I like to add that you need to identify the risk first, because knowing what the problem is your first step towards being able to deal with it. So here's the classic. I teach a college class in risk management, and this is the classic cycle that risk managers go through. The first thing we have to do is identify and inventory what are the problems. The second thing we do is we decide how bad it is. And we decide how bad that problem is by looking at how often is it going to happen, first of all, and then secondly, how bad is it going to be when it does happen? So we could have somebody who's driving along an icy road and the car goes off into the ditch and they get stuck. Well, big deal. Nobody got hurt. And that probably happens every day in every province, in every county across the country, many, many times in the wintertime. But how often does somebody get seriously hurt? Not that often. The problem is when they do, they're likely to bring a lawsuit, because who's going to blame themselves today? Not too many people blame themselves. Most people look for somebody else to blame. My personal classic example of looking for somebody else to blame, and you'll pardon me if I digress for a second, but my son was about 11 years old, and the rule was we come home from work, we make supper, then his job is to clean up and put everything away. Doesn't have to do the dishes, but put everything away. His friends come to the door and they want him to go out. So what does he do? I want to go now. Well, you can't go now. You got your job to do. So he's going to clear the table off. My husband and I split up. He goes one way, I go the other. We're at opposite ends of the house, and all of a sudden I hear a crash and there's a broken dish. What do you think my son's answer to that was? It's your fault, you made me do it. Well, that's the way a lot of people feel these days. It's never my fault. I got to find somebody else to do things. So when you're assessing risk, you got to look for the fact that how often are you going to get blamed? And trust me, we get blamed often enough that it's really surprising. In my job right now, I'm a full-time risk manager for the City of London. We get about 800 of those a day, where it's, or a week. 800 a year where it's your fault, not my fault. And I really don't believe it's anywhere near that, but they like to blame us. Oh, I better go back there. This thing isn't working, so I'll have to go back. There we go. So the next thing is prevention. Prevention is, the first thing that comes to mind is, well, if we just don't do it, nothing bad's going to happen. Well, if you just don't do it, you're probably not delivering the services that you're mandated to do or that your citizens want you to do. So avoiding something is usually not the answer. We usually have to deliver it. If we've decided that we're going to have a swimming pool or an arena, then we have to look after that swimming pool or arena. We just can't shut them down. The citizens expect us to continue to provide that service. Then we move on to control, and control can happen in a lot of different ways. Control can happen before the fact or after the fact. Control can come before by looking at what the speed limits are. In a town, you can put up things like traffic barriers to slow things down. You can have signs around schoolyards that warn of lower speed limits. You can do that sort of thing. And then after, you can do things like try to make the person at least feel that they've been heard, and I'll talk about that later. But basically, I find one of the best ways to deal with people is to empathize with them. Make sure your staff are nice and kind and take their complaints or their anxiety in a very nice and receptive way. And in one of the advantages, how many here are from, say, small towns under 10,000? Everybody's under 10,000. You have a great advantage, because when everybody knows everybody, you do have the advantage that people are less likely to make a claim. And I say that because you're somebody's brother-in-law, you're somebody's sister, you see each other at the rink, your kids are playing hockey, you meet in the grocery store. I come from a town of 350, so I know everybody when I grew up. And it was very unlikely somebody made a claim because they were probably related to the guy who was out there doing the snow plowing. So that helps tremendously. It has to be a really, really serious accident before generally somebody's going to make a claim. And then paying for it. That's where SUMA Assured comes in, is to pay for the claims after they happen. They can provide you with a lot of great information, and I totally agree. Being in a group buying membership like that, where you trade information, is absolutely amazing. There are some people that I know from some of the bigger cities, Saskatoon, Regina, who are in the risk management group that I belong to. And we trade information and ideas every single day on the internet about, you know, we're having this problem, what would you do about it? Have you run across this? One of the latest, I think, was ATVs going through town, and, you know, should we be providing them with more trails, more things to get from here to there, and how would you manage the trails, and would you let the volunteers do it, that sort of thing. And so having people that you can trade experiences and information with allows you from having to reinvent the wheel all the time. And then to review. I mean, we always have to review things, whether it's bylaws or how we're managing our parks or whatever it is we're doing, we always constantly have to review because life doesn't stay the same, or we'd still be out there using, you know, axes and horses, horse and wagon. So when you're dealing with your employees or with your contractors who are doing work, you have to make sure that they control their performance. And I run into that from time to time where people want to say, well, we'll tell them exactly how they're going to do it. The problem is if you tell them exactly how they're going to do it, then you're taking on a little bit more risk than what you want because you're giving them direction and you're exercising control over them. And once you start exercising that kind of control, you can be drawn into a lawsuit, and you don't want that to happen. What you need to do is define the job that they're going to do and the timing they're going to do it on, and then you have to make sure that they take responsibility for getting the job done the way they've promised to do it. Find the cause when things go wrong and learn from your mistakes. That's something we all know that we're supposed to be doing. Whether it's in road maintenance or anything else. We have to make sure, or we should make sure, that if we screw something up, that we look back and say, where did that go off the track and how can I make sure I don't do that again? Accept that no strategy is perfect. Yes, in risk management, we know right away we are never, ever going to have the perfect solution. We can analyze the heck out of it, but at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to make the perfect decision because it doesn't exist. All we can do is make the best decision we can at the time, and that's why we go back and review it later to make sure it's working the way we intended. I've had cases where I've been working with two different departments, and one department is trying to fix things, and meanwhile they're creating a problem for the other department because they never thought about, well, if I build this, if I build a nice new walkway through the park, isn't it gonna look wonderful, and aren't the citizens gonna love me? But they never stop to think about they're putting a roadway through a park that's got a lot of beautiful old trees and a lot of dead branches, and they made the walkway so narrow that the forestry guys can't get in there to trim the branches. So now we're got the chance of branches falling on people's heads. And I worry about things like that because we had half a tree fall on a lady, and she's permanently in a wheelchair. So I think about that kind of thing a lot. And then celebrate your successes. If you do something right, then it's really nice to know that everybody knows that, hey, we actually did something that has stopped claims from happening. So if you have, for example, instituted a process where your plow operators now have a little logbook or a little checklist and they check off, you know, yeah, they did this stretch of road at such and such a time, that was when they plowed it and sanded it. If you've got that little checklist and you can refer back to it the next time somebody sues you and that gets you off the hook for the claim, you can celebrate that by saying, wow, didn't our crew do a great job? They kept track of what they were doing and when they heard from the weather office and so on. So they have a record. And I can talk about one particular case where there was a a man, this is an arena one, but it's one of my successes. And in Leamington, Ontario, in a small town outside of Windsor, there was a man who fell because he said his gate caught in the ice, that his gate went through the ice, it was too thin, and he hit the concrete and he slid head first into the boards and became a paraplegic. That was about a $7 million lawsuit that he was awarded, about $7.5 million. So we tried to learn from that, and we instituted this little log book where they check off when they took the Zamboni out and they did the re-icing, and when they, what the training was of the guy who did it, and we had it all documented to the point where, you know, some of the guys didn't really care for this because it wasn't a lot of work, but it was certainly more work than they were used to. About 3 years later, we had exactly to a T the same accident. The only difference was the guy went in feet first, but he wrecked both knees. And his job was required him to stand all day. He was a tool and die maker. Anyway, we took all of these wonderful documents that we'd been preparing for 3 years, we took them to the lawsuit, and we celebrated that one because he was ordered to pay the city $17,000 in legal fees because we won. So we celebrate that. It proves that log books and records really, really do work. And we've used that strategy a lot of times since then. This is about 11 months ago. This story, it was on CBC News, and it talks about crashes were caused by storm. Police were kept busy with reports of jackknifed semis, cars and ditches and rollovers. The last paragraph, the roads are just all ice, said the trucker, who said blowing snow had hurt visibility. This really drives me crazy when I see a headline like this. The snow didn't cause the crash. The crashes were caused by people not driving for the conditions. That's what caused the crash. That this is what we're up against. When we see these kind of media reports, people read this and they think, oh, this is really great. Not my fault I had the accident. The accident was because of poor conditions on a wide swath of highways that led to the rollovers. That's how I got hurt. It was the road conditions. It wasn't my fault. So this is something that we really have to work against. But we do have to think beyond the motorists too. There's a lot of people that use the road. In addition to the cars and trucks and the ATVs, there's cyclists, and today it seems like there are more people that have less money, and so they're out there with their motorcycles and their bicycles, even in the worst kind of weather sometimes. We have pedestrians who are walking along the roadway, and we have, in the summer, we've got the skateboarders and the inline skaters who are out there. And the roads have to be designed to at least accommodate them to a reasonable degree. They don't have to be perfect, but they do have to recognize that there are other people out there. So when we're clearing snow in the winter, we have to think about when we get to where an intersection, we have to make sure that that intersection is at least reasonable for the pedestrians who are going to be using it. And it's easy for us to say, well, you know, not too many people walk around here. Most people drive everywhere. And I mean, we do. North Americans, we love to drive. But the fact is that courts have found that at intersections, we have to recognize that that is an extension of the sidewalk, that people will be walking from one sidewalk to the next, and that they have to get there. And they have to get there in safety. So we have to think about who's going to be there before us. Just the other week, I saw, in my case, we got lots of snow in London. You're lucky you don't have nearly as much snow as we do. And I saw at a couple of intersections where the abutting homeowners had gone out and they'd actually reduced the height of the snow pile. They'd spread the snow around because when they drove out, they couldn't see past the snowbank. And so they'd reduced it on their own behalf so that they could see traffic coming when they were trying to pull out. We had a lawsuit like that too. We had a lawsuit where a lady was pulling out of a park, and she was pulling onto a roadway to go. She had a group of friends, and they all went walking in the park in the morning. And she came out and was making a left-hand turn, and she said she couldn't see the motorist who hit her broadside coming because the snowbank was too high, and that was the municipality's fault. Well, first of all, under most driving statutes, you have to look where you're going, and you are required to make sure you can make a turn in safety. That's the first thing. The second thing was that she decided to drop the lawsuit against the guy driving the pickup truck, which really worked in our favor because that meant he didn't have to go to trial. So he was willing to help us, though, because he felt sorry for us, because he said he could see her, why couldn't she see him? And he said that she was checking traffic, but she was looking the other way when she pulled out. She wasn't looking to her left. And that really helped us. Also, she didn't sue us until 6 months later, so you can imagine there wasn't much snow left by the time we got the lawsuit. But he had been smart enough to go back, and he had a picture of the snow pile, so at least we had a picture of how much there was. That was another good case that we like to celebrate, because in her case it was $40,000 for the legal fees. And she really amazed me, this lady. She actually went in and took out a mortgage on her house and came in and gave us a check for the 40 grand. That shocked me. That's the only time that's ever happened. So think beyond them. Make sure your design and maintenance standards are reasonable for everybody who's going to use it. And that applies to everything, whether it's roads or playgrounds. You have to think beyond the 5-year-old who's going to be on the slide. You have to try to think beyond who you expect to be there. So everybody, young and old, people who are abled and disabled, who are careful and those who are not quite so careful. And then think about newcomers. As I went around the city here, I saw that you have a lot of newcomers to Canada as well. And those newcomers don't know how to drive in our conditions. And even if they've been here a year or two, they probably don't have the skills that most of you had, that were taught to you by your parents and that you've learned from experience. So think about that, and think about the fact that not that you have to go over and above, but the fact that you at least have to keep fairly reasonable standards for people of different skill levels. We're going to focus on liability because we can look at property damage, but property damage is generally going to be your own property. So damage to your own trucks if they get in an accident or they go off the road. Probably even more expensive than the damage to your trucks is injury to your employees, because a workers' compensation claim is going to cost you a lot. If you have to pay someone who's 30 years old with a couple of kids and a wife, and they have to be paid through workers' comp until they're 65 or lifetime, depending on how your workers' comp act works, that's a lot of money. So we don't, and then you have to replace that person. So in a sense, you've got two costs for the price of one worker. So that's expensive. But the problem with liability claims is that they're so unpredictable. We can guesstimate how many claims we've had, but weather really drives liability claims. If you have a nice mild winter and you don't have a lot of blowing, drifting snow, you're not going to have a lot of claims. If you have a bad winter that's really grueling, you get a lot of bad ice or packed snow that turns into ice, you're going to have more claims. That's just the way it is. And if you ask SUMA, I'm sure they can take their claims records and they can show you how the claims patterns follow the weather conditions. Liability claims are the least predictable because, as I say, it's all down to people. And some people are going to sue and some aren't. And the severity and the frequency is really an unknown. SUMA can tell you because they'll have enough records that they can look at this huge database and tell you that, you know, we expect to get 5,000 or 6,000 or however many claims they get in a year. But in your municipality, you've got so few drivers and so few people involved that you don't have it. You could have 1 year where you have 5 or 6, and then you might go 7 or 8 years where you only get 1 a year. You don't have the volume of data to really give you reliable statistics. So being in with a group gives you those reliable statistics. And you don't know the severity. 5 of us could go off the road this afternoon going somewhere, and one of us might be injured, and that injury could be a bruise or it could be a broken neck. We don't know. The severity fluctuates so much, it's really, really hard to know. And then if you got somebody who's really mad at the mayor because their taxes just went up, or no, or somebody who's been down and they wanted to get a building permit and they were told they had to do this and this and this and this, and now they're mad at the town because they had to do so much, and then they go out and they wreck their car, you're more likely to get a lawsuit from that person than you are from somebody who's happy. And I know for us, we find too that it depends on whether the judge likes the city. If the judge has hit a lot of potholes lately, we're probably going to get a harder sentence than we would otherwise. And also liability claims affect the morale of people a lot more, because we're talking about usually a lot of injuries and possibly death. And when those claims come in, if you're the worker who is supposed to be out there clearing the snow and you got blamed, that's going to hit you pretty hard, especially in a small community where you likely know of the person who was injured or died. That has a big effect on morale. So why do we sue municipalities? Well, sometimes it's just because they want the money and they're going to make somebody pay. And I know of several cases where the reason that they paid, they wanted the money, is because they felt that when they called in, they didn't get the apology, they didn't get the person saying that they were sorry, they didn't get the sort of empathy that they were looking for. And I actually had one person, as she picked up her check, say that. You know, if I'd had this meeting and had a chance to talk to people and think that they were really listening to me, I never would have gone to a lawyer. So it really does make a difference. I can give an example of a trip and fall. This was one of the first ones I heard about a few years ago. And it sort of went across Ontario. Everybody was paying attention. It happened in Hamilton, Ontario, and an older lady was walking down the sidewalk by City Hall, and I used to live in Hamilton for a little while. And the downtown core, the streets were not in the greatest condition. Anyway, this lady, she tripped on the sidewalk and she fell and she busted her glasses. So she's really close to City Hall, so she went trotting in there with her broken glasses, and she said to this sweet young thing who was working at the front desk about, you know, look what happened, and, you know, that sidewalk's in terrible condition. And not in so many words, but basically the message that the sweet young thing gave her, well, you know, you old fool, if you'd been looking where you were going, you wouldn't have tripped. So obviously the lady wasn't very happy, so she went home that night and she called her son, and he lived in Toronto, and she was telling him what had happened and how she was really mad. And he said, well, tell you what, Mom, you know so-and-so, I went to school with him. Remember him? He's a lawyer now. Why don't I give him a call tomorrow? Those glasses cost $10,000. If they had just paid for the glasses and said, gee, we're sorry. So for $200 or $300, it ended up costing them 10 grand. So I use that as a lesson for my staff when I'm talking to them. Always be nice. If somebody gets hurt, call them the next day and ask how they're doing. It never hurts to be nice. It's a definite tool that you can use all the time. So give them an apology. Improve loss prevention. We can always do that. I have lots of times where I get phone calls from people saying, you know, I'm not looking for anything. I just want you to know I don't want it to happen to somebody else's kid. So again, you say, oh, gee, thanks for calling. Thanks for letting me know. And sometimes it's just revenge, as I said, to get back because something happened that they didn't like. And today people do believe it's okay to fight City Hall. It's totally all right. Except if you're in a small town, it's a lot better. Yeah. When you're in a big city, nobody cares. They'll never see you again. They don't care. So here's what some of the rules are. In subsection 343-4, it stipulates that if the municipality fails to perform its duty, it is subject to the provisions of the Contributory Negligence Act. Does everybody know what that is? Anybody run across that before? It's something that's really important to lawyers and to people that pay liability claims in Saskatchewan. And you're civilly liable to anyone who sustains damage as a result of that negligence. So if you fail to perform, you're presumed to have been negligent. So the reality of negligence lawsuits is that rarely are they solved as 100%. Nothing is usually black and white. It's usually somewhere in there in those 50 shades of gray, yeah, that's where it is, somewhere in there. And typically, it is shared by way more than one person. And I like to use the phrase that there's always enough blame to go around. I can usually find lots of people to blame. So what happens is, we have an accident. And I say, it's all your fault. And he says to me, no, no, it's not my fault, it's your fault. And usually what we'll find out is, well, we both somehow screwed up. And maybe we can find somebody else who screwed up because they didn't have the traffic signals working in proper synchronization. Or maybe the sign was confusing and it really wasn't a yield, it should have been a stop sign or something like that. We can usually spread the blame. And in the case of motorists, they like to blame municipalities because the reality is that the municipality has lots of money, and we know you're not going to go bankrupt. You got lots. If you run out of money, you just raise taxes, right? That's so easy. Yep. I talked about the guy earlier, the hockey player who went headfirst into the boards. That lawsuit was settled for more than they had insurance for. So yeah, I don't know what your limits of liability are, but you might want to take a look at them. That's my own. I even increase my own personal insurance because I've learned that, somebody gets hurt. If you have to pay for their well-being even for 10 years, you would be amazed what they sue for these days. They ask for someone, well, I've got one right now where he slipped and fell on ice on the boulevard. He wants us to buy a van because he can't drive in the car because it's hard to get in and out of the car now. He wants someone to paint the house because he usually did all the painting in the house. He wants someone to paint the house every 5 years for the next 15 to 20 years because that's how long they plan to live there. And they had to build a new deck. Well, he wants that new deck paid for, and you just go on and on. It's amazing what they can come up with. Lawyers are doing a great job. Are there any lawyers in the room? Not after that, no. Anyway, I digress. So this is what the contributory negligence. Contributory negligence says everybody that was involved in the accident has to pay towards the claim. So in 2002, this accident happened here in Shellbrook. And the Supreme Court found that Shellbrook was liable for injuries suffered by the plaintiff in a vehicle driven by a drunk driver that crashed on a Type B trail. So the damages were about $2.5 million. That's pretty low today for a serious injury case. But half of it was his own fault. He was drunk. So 50% was the drunk driver's fault, 35% to the municipality, and 15% to the plaintiff passenger. Because after all, what did he get in the car for if he knew the guy was a drunk? He shouldn't have been riding with him. So he got a little bit of liability. The municipality was found liable because they said it didn't post a warning sign to warn of the curve ahead. And I'll tell you, there's all kinds of ways they can get around this signage thing. They can say that the sign wasn't clear, the sign wasn't far enough back, because depending on the speed you're driving, the sign has to be far enough back to allow you to adjust before you get to the curve. They could have said that the sign was worn, that somebody'd used it for target practice, and so a lot of the coating had been chipped off, or it could have been faded so they couldn't see it. There's lots of ways to attack signage. So the fact that you just have a sign there, it has to be in good condition. Could have been.
Yeah, the sign would be blurred because the guy was drunk.
Yeah, the sign would be blurred because he was drunk, exactly. Yeah, that wouldn't help. And the fact that he wouldn't react as quickly. This is how long it takes for a serious injury case to go through trial. So you see from 1990 to 2004 is how long this case took. It can take a long, long time. I had one that went 18 years, and that was because it was a young child, and we had to wait until she was through school, completely through school, to know the extent of the brain damage, because they wanted to see how she did through public school and high school to see whether she could go on to college or whatever. By the end of it, her mother was going to become a lawyer because she'd learned so much. So you can see it takes a long time because you do your investigation right at the beginning when everything's fresh in everybody's mind. We have to collect the data, and then we determine, who's liable for this. Then they get expert opinions, and expert opinions are getting incredibly expensive. If I want an expert opinion from some sort of a medical specialist, like a neuropsychologist or an orthopedic or something like that, I can count on spending anywhere from $4,000 to $8,000 per report. And somewhere probably in the $5,000 range for the engineer who looks at the road. And then you got to be sure you got the right engineer, because the person who's suing you is also going to hire an engineer, and you want your engineer to be better than theirs. I mean, I had one where they were doing a sidewalk investigation, and the engineer that they hired, his expertise was electrical engineering. So we could get rid of him pretty quick. So, you know, you got to make sure you got the right expert. Then you go on to get ready for the trial, for the pre-trial or mediation. And at this point, you decide, do these people look like they're willing to settle? Because if they're not willing to settle, there's no point hiring a mediator at $2,000 or $3,000 a day to come in and listen to your story if you don't think the people are going to accept it. It's a lot of wasted time and money. Once you've been through the pretrial or mediation, if it doesn't settle at that point, usually you find out enough information that now you want to go and get more expert reports. Then you're going on for your final trial or mediated settlement, and that's when the costs really start to ratchet up, because it's like preparing for an exam if you've gone to college or university. You got to put about 3 times as much effort into it as the actual trial itself will cost. So it's a lot of money. So back to the contributory negligence. The intent is to make sure that the innocent victim actually gets the money that he or she deserves, and that whoever was negligent is the one that's going to pay. So in the case of 2 or 3 plaintiffs, the way that the usual joint and several liability or contributory negligence process works is, if I'm sued and I'm 50% at fault, and you're sued and you're 50% at fault, and I don't have any money, then you get the pleasure of paying it all. So the innocent party gets all the money. And that's the way it used to be here in Saskatchewan, and it changed in 2005. So the Contributory Negligence Act says that other persons found at fault mean that the person suffering the damage or loss, if that person has been found at fault and the other person's found at fault, from whom the contribution can be collected. So now we look at who's got money and who doesn't, and how are we going to split up the shortfall. So if the court is satisfied that the contribution cannot be collected, the court shall, not may, but they have to, after determining the degree in which each person is at fault, then order apportioning of that contribution that cannot be collected amongst all the other parties that are at fault, proportionate to the degree to which they have respectively been found at fault. And this started on January 1st, 2005. So since then, you've got some relief on this joint and several or contributory negligence. So beginning with the housing award, which was the one I mentioned earlier. So before 2005, it was a $10 million, SUMA $10 million loss. The car driver had no money. The passenger had no money. The road authority, well, they've got lots of money. They got $10 million, and they can always tax for more if they needed. So the split was that the road authority was 35% responsible. The drunk driver was 50%, so he had the lion's share of the award, and the passenger was 15% responsible. Total $10 million. But because the other two had no money, the municipality got to pay it all. So the passenger got the full amount of the award. After January 1st, 2005, if this lawsuit had happened then, doesn't change the beginning. Neither one of the car driver or the passenger had any money. The municipality still had all the money. But in this case, they only had to pay 35% of the drunk driver's award or percentage, and they only had to pay 35% of the passenger. And so it came down to, instead of paying $10 million, they only had to pay $5.25 million. I mean, it's only $5.25 million between friends and enemies, but It's a whole lot less than it would have been before. They saved $4.75 million, so it makes a huge difference. Mm-hmm.
On that scenario there, say the lawsuit started prior to 2005. Okay, say it started in 2003.
Mm-hmm.
The rules changed in 2005. Which rules do they go by if it's not settled till 2006 or whatever?
That's a good question, and I don't have the answer. Do you have the answer? Hmm?
Date of claim, I do believe.
It's the date of claim, is it?
What was that?
It would be as of the date of claim.
So when it starts, that's what it comes under.
So the rules changed partway through, that's not,
That doesn't affect, no.
Okay, yeah. I am not a lawyer. They changed the rules in Ontario. I have a little chart that I have to look at all the time, just to keep myself straight. So now we're going to talk about risk strategies, about building your defense and what we're going to do from there and how you can protect yourselves. So beginning with the cost of the strategy, it doesn't cost anything for you to give your administrators support on doing the right thing as far as roads maintenance, making sure that they have appropriate equipment with other municipalities of similar size, making sure that your job descriptions are up to date, that they get proper training, that they have the proper log books and checklists and all the kind of things, the documentation that's required. That doesn't cost a cent. It just requires a little bit of attention, and hopefully the more you learn about it, the more you'll realize how important that is. Risk identification can cost a little to a lot. There's lots of experts who would be happy to come in and tell you what you should be doing differently, and you can hire them at the cost of, X $100 an hour, and they'd be happy to come. But for the most part, if your staff are going to regular meetings for people in that type of work, they're going to be hearing that from each other. They're going to know that. All they need to do is to stay up to date with what each other's doing, with what the vendors are coming in and talking to them about, and so on. That part's fairly easy. Implementation, that can cost from a little to a lot, and again, it depends on what kind of equipment you have, how much you think you need to update, how much sand and salt you put on the roads, and whether you think you need to increase it or change it. That all comes down to what are you doing now, and do you feel that what you do now is appropriate for the situation. And also, do you close the roads? And I don't know who closes the roads, if it's the RCMP who decide when the roads are closed, or who decides that. But generally, a lot of insurance companies don't like to pay claims if the roads are closed because they feel that the people shouldn't have been there in the first place. So some of the proactive strategies that you can do is to aim to reduce the frequency and severity, and that comes from looking at the speed limits and what should people be driving, and making sure that your speed limits and so on are appropriate for the circumstances, and update your standards. What I find is a lot of our staff, they want to do a good job, and they do the best job that they can with the equipment and the materials and the knowledge that they have. At least on the manager's level and the supervisor's level, when they get to that point, they're usually very committed. They've been there long enough to know that this is an important job, and it really does benefit the municipality. But when you ask them what the standard should be, how often should they plow? Should they start plowing as soon as, should they send the plows out as soon as the snow starts? Should they wait? How much sand and salt should they be applying? If they don't have a standard, how do you know if they've done it right? So the important thing is to set standards that are reasonable under the circumstances. And again, by working with their colleagues in other municipalities, they can pretty well set those standards. What I've seen is sometimes they set their standards too high because they really, really want to do a good job, and they set them up here, but then practically speaking, somebody calls in sick or one of the machines break down, and for whatever reason, they can't make that standard. And the judge isn't going to care that they don't make why they didn't make the standard. All they're going to look at is, you said you were going to do this good a job, and you only did this good a job. And I keep reminding people that, you know, if you do go to trial, if that is the end result and you have to go to trial at some point, you've worked for the municipality for 23 years. And the first 8 years, all you did was you drove a plow in the winter and you drove a grader in the summer. That's what you did. And then you moved into supervision, and then you moved into management. And all along the way, you were learning a little bit more through experience, through working with colleagues, through taking seminars. You've got 5 days at trial to try to teach a judge 23 years of experience. And if he doesn't get it, you could lose. So you've really, really got to focus on how fast can you educate that judge to see things from your point of view. So it's really, really important to understand that, you know, you could lose, and yet you could feel you did the best job you could under the circumstances. So don't set your standards too high. Make sure you have the good documentation, that you have the inspection frequency. Do you listen to the radios? What radios, or how do you get your information about weather conditions? How do you know when to call in plows or contractors? What do you inspect? When you go out and you are looking at signs, what do you look for and how often do you do it? And do you have a routine so that you go the same routes at the same time so that they all get inspected properly? And then set response times. For you want to say, if I find a damaged sign, that I've got 3 days, 5 days, whatever the situation is, and that I know it's going to be replaced in that period of time. If it's something that you know you got to send out for, you know you don't make signs in-house, somebody else makes them and it has to come. If that takes a week, then make sure your standard is that you don't fix it within a week or 10 days. Pick a standard that's reasonable. That's always, always got to be important, because you will be judged as to whether or not you met standards. Your policies are really important. As elected officials, you have the ultimate say on what the policies in the municipality are going to be. And if you set the policy, if the administration comes to you and says, here's our plan, we're going to do all of the major roads first, and we're going to do the secondary streets in our towns where maybe there's schools or hospitals or community centers where there's going to be a lot of people, they're going to get done second, and then we'll worry about, we've got a route, but we'll worry about all the lesser roads that are less traveled, they'll be relegated third priority. And we're going to start at such and such a point. If they can tell you that those processes and procedures are reasonable and you approve it, that provides extra support for the municipality if there's a lawsuit. Because your standards, they require, or they expect that when you accept a policy and you pass a policy for the municipality, that you have considered all of the things that are important to the overall municipality. You've thought about the cost of taxes if you have to add more trucks or do more work. You've thought about, you know, how many people are going to be affected going to the schools, going to the community center, getting to a hospital in an emergency. So yes, it makes sense that they would be pretty high on the priority list. So presumably you've thought about all of the needs of all of your constituents, and you've taken that into account. And it doesn't, again, require a level of perfection. It requires a level of reasonable care. And that provides the municipality and your staff with a level of legal liability protection. The next part is for the administrators to make sure they've got reasonable procedures and practices that support those policies. Those procedures and practices don't have to be in the policy, but what they have to do is make sure that they do what they said they were going to do in the big picture. And then finally, that staff, the right staff are hired and trained and supervised, and that they keep the right documentation that provides them with accurate and timely creation. You don't want somebody doing their plow shift at 7 o'clock in the morning or finishing at 7 o'clock in the morning, going home and having a sleep, and then going down to the coffee shop at 3 in the afternoon and writing up their notes. They better do it when they're done their shift before they go home. You want it to be timely. And someone needs to review it. Not that we are reviewing it for the purposes of saying, you know, did you dot the I and cross the T, but just does it make sense? One of my colleagues in Ontario, they lost a huge lawsuit because they didn't check the logbooks closely enough, and the other side did. And when they got to trial, this employee who swore he'd done everything right, the other side came up and proved that he could not have been where he said he was at the times he said he was because he couldn't have driven that fast. There was no way he could have done it. So check it to make sure that at the very least it makes sense. Documentation integrity is really, really important. It has to be accurate, it has to be timely, and it has to be logical. So this is from one of the lawyers that I was looking at, and I thought it was a really good way of summing up what courts expect to see. Defense lies in the ability to prove that the standards were met. You can only do so by having in possession accurate and current records of maintenance activities. A municipality's failure to properly record important information provides the other side with tremendous ammunition at trial, and it substantially increases the likelihood of finding negligence. So it's really, really important. It's not what you said you did, it's what can you prove it. And if I like to say, if it ain't in writing, it didn't happen. And here's one, this was from a lawsuit. This was in the judgment by the judge. A policy of maintenance that does not include an element of accountability on the part of the men assigned to do the work is meaningless in that there is no clear indication as to exactly what work has been done and what has been omitted. If crews are to be dispatched into prescribed areas, they must account for what streets were and were not serviced. Otherwise, the defendant will have difficulty in meeting its evidentiary burden. So in other words, again, if you don't have it documented properly, you're going to have an awful time at trial proving you did what you said you did. So some of your best defenses are, have policies and standards that are approved by council. Have procedures that support that policy, and then follow those procedures. Don't just ignore them. That's one of the problems is when you hire new people and you train them, the problem is if I train you, you're going to remember probably most of what I said. Then you train him, and it's like the telephone game. By the time we get to the third or fourth person down the row, who knows what they're doing? So make sure people or staff know and understand that how to treat ice and snow, and that they have some training in it. They know things about the way ice, snow, and sand react. Standard operating procedures that meet standards for your size and type of municipality. They're not going to measure you against a much different municipality. You're going to be measured against people who are like you. And then be prepared to analyze the risks and identify high priority spots. For example, we know bridges are higher priority simply because we know bridges will freeze faster than roadways. Lots of places now we have signs that warn people of that. And we can say, oh, well, you know, we grew up here. We know this sort of stuff. But again, think about your new immigrants. Think about people who are maybe here for just a holiday and they've come to visit a relative who's living here, and they don't know that sort of thing. So we can't just assume that everybody's like us. Make sure you've got evidence that shows when and how your staff are informed of weather changes. So where do they get it? How often do they check it? What happens when shifts change? How do you make sure that one shift supervisor passes on the information to the next supervisor? Make sure you can tell where the weather reports originated. One of the first things that I do when I get a winter road claim is I go to Environment Canada and I get a record of what the weather was, and you can get it by the hour. So I can tell when the rain started or when the snow started, how much was it, how heavy was it, what direction was the wind coming from, what was the temperature, and the other side, they can do that too, and they do. Road conditions. What's your method and frequency of patrol? Do you have people who are trained on what to look for, and how do they track it? Do they write down the records when they get to the next stop sign? They make a little note in their book, or what are they expected to do for their records? Resource deployment, who do you send out and when do you send them out, and what did you tell them to do when they were sent out? So whether it's your own staff or contractors, you need to keep track of that. One of my strangest ones was, we have firefighters that work 24-hour shifts, which means that they get a lot of time off. I think they work about like 90 days a year or something because they do the 24-hour shift, so they have a lot of part-time. We had an accident where a fatality happened, and the guy who was driving the plow was a firefighter who was off duty, but he was making up some extra money, and he'd had an hour's training. That was his first day on the shift. So he was with a contractor. He wasn't one of ours, but he was with a contractor, and that was the day that the lawsuit came out of. So you know, you always have to wonder about, you have control over what you do, but how do you tell your contractors what they're supposed to do? What kind of ice and snow treatment methods were used, and how do they compare with what your sister municipalities do? And did they have established routes? So do you have routes that say you do the primary streets first and then the secondaries and so on? If you can't show you were compliant, then you're going to be judged non-compliant. It's as simple as that. Checklists are really simple. They're an easy way for them to complete and show that they did it. And has anyone here, do you know if you have checklists? It's an easy question to ask. You know you don't. Well, if you know you don't, then you know what to do. So that's good. Do you have logbooks? If you know you don't have logbooks, I've seen cases where employees say, I've got a logbook, but I also keep my doctor's appointments in it and my kids' hockey practices, and that's my logbook. And I say, no, it's not your logbook. The logbook was provided by the municipality. It's usually just a little agenda book for the year. And at the end of the year, you turn in that book and I'll give you a new one because it belongs to us. It doesn't belong to you. Because in the past, I've seen employees take them home and refuse to give them when there's been an accident or a claim. And now we collect the logbooks and we keep them for whatever the records retention bylaw says. Audit records, do audit records make sense? So if someone is going back, like your manager goes back and does a random check of a few days, do they make sense? Or are suddenly you've got somebody saying they plowed for 4 hours on a day when there was no snow? What were they doing out there? Or did they go out there at all? So make sure that they make sense, and then keep those records where you can find them. Because for the length of time that they might be needed until a lawsuit comes in, you're going to want to have them handy. If you have contractors who are doing your work, you're going to have a similar system. You're not going to have as tight a control because you want those contractors to be responsible for their own actions. I'm not allowed to go out and speak to the contractors on their annual orientation session every year because I went twice and they said I scared them too much. So now they have my colleague go out instead. So you need to have a formal contract with them and you have to know where it is. Make sure that contract contains a hold harmless and an indemnity agreement. That is so critically important where they accept responsibility for their actions. And that there's three elements. There's the hold harmless, there's the indemnity agreement, and then there's the insurance clause. The hold harmless basically says, if I make a mistake in doing my job, I promise that I'll look after it and I won't blame the municipality. The indemnity agreement says, and if I do something like I said I wouldn't in the hold harmless, I won't hold you responsible, and if it costs you money, I promise I'll pay you back. That's good. Then the insurance policy says, and guess what? I've got insurance, so I've got enough money to pay you back if I do make a mistake. So you need all three of those things together in order to make sure that you've got proper coverage from your contractor. We do have an annual orientation session, and I believe we started that after the firefighter snowplow driver incident. We started the refresher, and we say that they must have people who are properly licensed and properly trained in order to do the job. That's now in the contract that they have to have that. The orientation session covers what's new, because every year, you know, things change. You might add a few kilometers of road, or you might change a few kilometers from gravel to pavement or whatever. So you want to go over that sort of thing. You might talk about some new requirements or some new equipment that you're using, or some new methods that have come up, so you make sure that they know what you're doing. And then you want to let them know that, yeah, I will be monitoring to make sure that you meet specifications. So there will be random times when the supervisor will go out and maybe follow one of your trucks around for half an hour, 15 minutes, and you won't know when he's coming. But somebody will be there to check it, to make sure that, yeah, you did plow it. I had one case, again, we find out about these things because of accidents. One case where some trucks, a pickup truck and a car, hit head-on a bridge, and apparently they had been out there sanding and salting, but the GPS showed that this was a contractor. The contractor was over on a side street for an hour without the truck moving. We figured he was having a nap, because it was like 4 o'clock in the morning. So when you're hiring contractors, make sure that you assign them responsibilities, that they know what they're supposed to do. You get the hold harmless and indemnification. You're transferring the cost of risk. Remember, I said we're going to identify the losses. We're going to determine how bad they are. We're going to try to get rid of them if we possibly can. The last thing we have to do is pay for them. In this case, we want the contractor to pay for them. We don't want it coming out of our pockets or our insurance companies, because that'll just make our premiums go up, and we don't want that. So we want to transfer it to somebody else. And get proof of insurance, because they can tell us anything they want, but if you don't have proof of insurance, then you're going to be behind the 8 ball. Because how'd you like to call up the contractor and say, oh, by the way, we've just been sued. Can you give us proof of insurance so we can tell your insurance company? They're not going to be too happy about that. Make sure your municipality is included as an additional insured on any general liability policy. Even if they're plowing with trucks, you're not going to be added as an additional insured on the auto policy. It doesn't work that way. The insurance will only put your municipality on the general liability. The advantage of being an additional insured on a liability policy is that you can go to their insurance company and report the claim, because you have the right to do that under the policy. So if you can't find them because they've gone out of business, or they've decided to move to Alberta and make more money, that's fine, because you've got a record of where the insurance company is, and you can tell them yourself. Vicarious liability is the traditional master-servant relationship, where you're responsible for your servant's actions, and it applies to employer-employee relationships, and applies to contractor relationships, and even volunteers. If you have a volunteer who's helping you out with something like going in to plow at the arena because it's a really heavy snowfall right now, and they're out there cleaning the arena parking lot for you out of for the good of their health, and they hit something, well, they could come back on you because they're volunteering for you. So when you need to recruit your staff carefully, choose your equipment wisely, train them well, train your people well, and then supervise them to the extent that they need it. Obviously, the more experienced they become, the less supervision necessary. Quickly go over sign inspections. Look that they're in the right place, that they're in good condition. If there are temporary conditions, you have to put those signs out there as well. If there's, the road is broken up because of the spring thaw or something, you need to tell them that. If it's a seasonal use road and you don't maintain it in certain months, make sure you tell them that. So make sure your signs are appropriate for the situation. Inspection frequency will depend on your class of road, what the seasonal conditions are, daily conditions and traffic volumes. The higher the speed and the higher the traffic volume, the higher priority that roadway should be. Because the faster they go and the more vehicles that are on the road, the more likely you are to have accidents. That's why the major highways are always one of the top priority. You expect them to be better looked after than some of the side roads, because the fact is the speed's higher and you think you're going to get more traffic. So that's why they're so important. Stay abreast of developing standards. Make sure your staff stay on top of what's happening and what other people are doing. Because if you keep doing things the way they always have, you're going to keep getting the same results, and you don't want to fall behind your peers. You want to stay up with the rest of the group. Take complaints seriously. Always be nice to these people. Even though sometimes you're gritting your teeth, you really, really have to be nice to them. It pays off in the long run. And keep the evidence. Keep any photos or measurements. If you've got photos or measurements of something that was related to an accident, make sure you've got it. Record phone calls, emails, logbooks. We're not talking about writing a novel here. We're talking about a sentence or two that will allow you to remember what happened. And I don't know, I'm running out of time. Do you want me to continue, or you just want to look at the video? That's good? Or let's go. What was that? The video will do? Okay. Are there any questions then? No questions?
No question.
My goodness. Okay, please do.
Speak at the microphone, please.
It's on, okay. When you're talking about insurance, one thing is what I was told a long time ago, you never let it know how much liability insurance you have. Because if you tell them you've got whatever, that's usually what they will target. Now, can the legal system that's prosecuting you in a lawsuit, can they find out how much insurance you have?
Well, it's a matter of public record, so yes, they can find out if they want to. It'll be probably in your minutes or something, your council minutes, you know, that you bought insurance and this is what you were buying. So it's a matter of public record. But I'm with you. I never volunteer. If we're contracting with somebody, like we're going to rent an office space or something, and they say they want us to have $2 million insurance, I've got $2 million insurance. I don't tell them I got 5, 10, 20. You ask for 2, that's what you get. Never volunteer.
It really doesn't protect anything then? By
Not really. It's much worse in prior to working in the public sector. I worked in the private sector, and we had a lot of subsidiaries in the U.S. and in the U.S. is where they really play on how much insurance do you have, and they sue to the max. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you everyone for your attention, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Are we gonna do video? That's okay.
What's it on, Joe? Before you guys go, please have a seat back down. Give you an example of one of the issues that was near and dear to my heart. My dad comes from a small town in Saskatchewan. I won't name Lanigan's name, but when I started driving many years ago, I went to visit relatives, and of course, not having been brought up in that unnamed Lanigan town, I wasn't familiar as all the residents were, and this was when Lanigan was, oops, I said it, when Lanigan was only about 500 population, if that. And the stop sign was down, and the stop sign was down, and the stop sign was down, and I didn't know that, but all the residents did, and they knew that that was a stop sign, a corner intersection, so they stopped. Well, when I went visiting, I was busy looking around and talking and went through because there was no stop sign, and was an accident. And guess who could have sued his father's hometown, but didn't because he knows everybody there. And, you know, that's the kind of thing that can happen. So for, as Joy said, for those of us that live in our own community or the neighboring one, and we know the traffic patterns and a sign isn't up or it is up or can't see it or, you know, it doesn't look very good, and you don't report it. These are the things that I think we need to be wary of, because as we said at the very start of the session, being proactive and understanding what risk you do have in your municipality. If you don't have any claims, your premiums will reflect that. If you do, your premiums will reflect the claims that you have as well. So today's session, I think, is very appropriate for us as we manage our communities. Many of our communities are getting larger, and we're getting more and more new people into our communities, and some of those new people are of the type that grew up in a larger center where it didn't matter, they sued because that was the thing to do. So we are in a position now, I think, of enhanced liability issues with our newer residents and some who through no fault of our own, but as Joy said, the way we deal with them encourages them to sue us. And while it isn't our own money coming out of our own pocket, it is money that we're responsible for in our own municipalities. So I encourage us all to take heed of what Joy had to say today, and I'd like to thank her especially. We've had many presenters in the past who have talked about issues that are fairly complex when it comes to legal issues and going beyond common sense, which is sometimes the way we live most of our lives. But bringing us back to basics, I think, was important for us, Joy, and I think localizing examples, the Shellbrook one was important as well. Noting all the work that our employees do, documentation is so important because, as she says, if it isn't written, it never happened. Because one side said no and you say yes, and who are they to believe when some guy walks in with a cast and a crutch? Judge is going to tend to think that it was our fault, regardless of whether it was or not. And building a defense, we don't have to anticipate, go to bed each night thinking that we're going to be sued, but using that concept of what if we are? How do we defend ourselves, and what is the best method? And documentation is very important. And being proactive and protective of our municipality, just like we are of our homes. So on behalf of the SUMA membership, no more questions for Joy? I'm supposed to remind you as well, I forgot to at the start, so I'm sure glad there wasn't an emergency in this building, because if you get on an airplane now, just before you land, they tell you where the exits are. They didn't used to do that a year or two ago, but now they do. And so I'm sitting there in an airplane. All of a sudden, a flight attendant comes on and says, by the way, we're just about ready to land, and the emergency exits are. I'm figuring, oh my goodness, something's wrong. No, they didn't say nothing's wrong, but just in case. So we're supposed to say, just in case, look on page 37 of your booklets, and that shows you the escape routes for this particular building. And while I try and make jokes of it, hopefully nothing will happen. But if it does, it's there for you to recall, so that we can all get out safely if something does happen. So on behalf of SUMA delegates here today, Joy Jackson, thank you very much for your presentation.
And if anybody wants to hang around, I'll play this 2-minute video. The whole idea behind this, I'm showing it to you to show that it can apply to anything. It doesn't just have to be municipalities.
Excuse me, young lady. What do you think you're doing?
Doing the dishes, if that's all right.
Of course it is. Doing the dishes is a very important part of family life. It ensures good hygiene and cleanliness. But I wonder, have you evaluated the risks in performing this task?
Well,
Apparently not. I think that you need to compile a risk assessment.
a risk assessment for doing the dishes.
In this brave new world, you can't be too careful. Come with me. You simply need to evaluate the risks of what you're about to do.
But my water will go cold.
Exactly. And what could that mean? While it may appear that all the grease and debris of your plates and cutlery is dead, some of the bacteria will still survive, invisible to the naked eye, ready to attack your children at any given notice. Yes, now go on, write that down. Beware of these four-pronged forks. You may not see them as a silky sense, but they can easily pierce the biggest organ in your body, your skin. That's right. And all your blood will spill into the water, and it will spread all your diseases and your STDs.
I don't have STD.
I don't know that. That's why we do risk assessment. Now, let's talk wrinkly fingers.
If you have wrinkly fingers, you might not be able to control your grip.
No, although at least you're trying. I'm talking about the fact that they may stay that way forever. That is why we use rubber gloves as a precaution. Without these rubber gloves, your fingers will become wrinkly. No one wants to be with a wrinkly-handed freak. You'll be forever alone. He'll divorce you. He'll marry a hubby Angeline, and he'll pimper out for thousands of pounds, and you won't get a penny, you wrinkly-handed bitch. That's not going to happen now. But you have done a risk assessment, and you have assessed the risks. This form is satisfactory. Good day.
he's got wrinkly fingers. Thanks, everybody. Next session starts at 1:45 or 3.
Quarter to 3.
So if they're volunteers and they do what they're doing on behalf of the municipality, something goes wrong.
How are you? Good. No. Hey.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of us learn to love. On the presentation, yeah, 17th February. After that, it'll be on the SUMA website. In past years, there was a recording, and we had to pay $10 or something to send in your something on the registration pack after the post-convention package, and we send you out something. $10 presentation. Now they're all going to be on the website. That's okay. It'll be there after.
It'll be there for probably
Yeah.
a few months, right?
Oh, yeah, not just that day. We'll be there for probably a year, until next convention. Yeah, and if you want to know, if you want more information, SUMA Assure, SUMA's insurance reciprocal, has fact that has experts on our staff, on our SUMA Assure contract staff, and they will give you all kinds of information. Probably give Joyce or others. That's what it is. You can get from us versus this guy. It's just one of the, because you're an owner, so you get all this stuff for free. So, but being a member, assuming you get this presentation for free as well. But it doesn't. It just makes you aware. Oh, okay. Thank you. Yeah, you got another one coming up.
The same thing.
Same one, actually.
It'll be very different. We won't do the same thing.
Oh, is that right?
I never do it twice exactly the same.
Oh, not exactly. Are we starting? Anyways, I won't take the big word. Oh, that's fine. That's fine. Thank you. Thanks for your interest.
Check one of these. Pick them up before.
No. Yeah. Yeah, sure.
was really good. Oh, thank you. Enjoyed it.